and no hold barred, and we are live. It's Friday, the Fireside Chat. I don't have a fire. I don't have pizza because Pizza Friday is usually a thing, but not today. But I am joined by a good mate of mine, Rob Meyerson, from Heirloom Agency out in the San Fran area. But he's also the main, owner, founder of How Brands Are Built. And if you're not familiar with that blog and platform and newsletter, I highly recommend subscribing. And Rob, how are you? Thanks for joining.
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Steve.
For those people who live under a rock and don't know who you are or what How Brands Are Built is, give everyone like a 30-second little overview.
Yeah, I'm a brand consultant and a namer. Some people may know me for my background in naming, which I can talk about. But I run Heirloom, just an independent brand consulting firm. I'm based in near San Francisco, in a little town south of San Francisco called Pacifica. And then, as you said, I also run How Brands Are Built, which I started 3 or 4 years ago as a blog and a podcast.
Yeah.
The podcast is on a bit of a hiatus, but the blog is still very much going strong. And there's a monthly newsletter where I send out branding news from the month and anything else that I think people will be interested in the branding industry.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you joining, and to those who are joining live, I see Jason says friend of mine, happy Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah to you as well, Jason, and happy Hanukkah to our friends out there of the Jewish faith. And today is day one. I'm gonna light the first candle. Rob,
first candle was last night, right? I think first candle was last night.
I think so. I'm not really sure, but
I could be wrong.
I'm sure we'll get corrected, right? So I was excited to chat with you because I want to like peek into like the crystal ball and like I want to like futurescape. I want to know from an expert's side of things like what next year is going to bring. We have an election coming, which is not going to be an easy time for us marketers or for brands looking to stand out. And I think just the general consumer is going to get overwhelmed and cluttered with content real soon. But, what's your take on like how next year is shaping up to be from a brand and advertising perspective?
Oh man, you said it's not going to be easy for a marketer. I feel like it's not going to be easy for Americans in general. It's going to be an interesting year. I do think it's important, first off, to remind ourselves that it is sort of a uniquely American phenomenon, right? The election, obviously, it impacts the whole world in some ways, but I don't think we want to overemphasize the degree to which the rest of the world pays attention to U.S. elections. And also the political polarization in the U.S. is not entirely unique to the United States, but it's something that we suffer from more than a lot of other countries. And so, yeah, it impacts marketers, especially those doing business in the U.S. I think, we can get into this, but we've seen a lot of brands kind of take a stand, right, on one side or the other of the political divide in the U.S. You've got brands like Goya, the beans company that I think contributed to Donald Trump's campaign, and then sort of famously the can was held up in the Oval Office. Talk about free publicity, right? And then you've got probably more brands kind of on the other side of that spectrum, like brands like Nike, making a stand for Colin Kaepernick, and then you've got the backlash to all of that. People burning their Nikes on YouTube and people shooting cans of Bud Light with their AK-47. So it's crazy out there. I think there's an argument to be made that from a purely marketing, there's purpose and there's political ideology and there's things that we as human beings believe in strongly, and you can imbue a brand with that to some degree, for better or worse. And then there's just business and marketing, which ideally should be we should be able to have a pretty pragmatic head about how we're building a business or a brand. And so there's an argument to be made that brands should kind of avoid getting too into the fray. And I may get some flack for saying that. These brands do have big platforms. And so if they do believe in something, they have an opportunity and maybe to some degree of responsibility to stand up for something. But it's dangerous, as we've seen with the Bud Light debacle from last year. Not only Did they annoy a lot of people on the political right by having a trans spokesperson? But then they caught a huge amount of backlash from the LGBTQ community for them sort of backing away. They kind of
Yeah.
said, "Oh, whoops, that was a mistake.
My bad.
We didn't mean." Yeah, and so it's like they just pissed off everybody, and
Yeah.
I mean that's the worst case scenario. So I guess the lesson to be learned is, if part of the lesson, one of the lessons is, if you're going to take a stand, make it something that you really believe in and that you're gonna stick with, in spite of any kind of backlash, or frankly any short-term financial implications. And if you're not ready to do that, then I think don't do it. You don't have to have a political stance necessarily, just to run a business or be a brand in the US or anywhere else.
I love what you just said. It reminds me of, I geek out on philosophy a lot, right? And Marcus Aurelius said, like, you don't have to have an opinion about something. And I think brands sometimes, and I don't know, I could be completely off base, but they think that because they are influential that they have to take a stance, and you
Yeah.
don't necessarily have to. But like you said, like, if you are, then make sure that you're consistent, right? Make sure you're just not flip-flopping left and right, literally,
Yeah.
because I think you're going to alienate core users and alienate your audience, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you're a brand like Patagonia, where the CEO and founder really has this strong point of view, and it's always going to be about that. People love to point to Patagonia as the poster brand for standing for a cause, but it comes at a price.
Yeah.
The huge investment that they've made in doing that, and it really kind of runs bone deep with them. It's not just something that they're doing an ad campaign around one year.
Right.
Um, so yeah, totally agree. And I think part of the reason, to your point about brands feeling like they have to say something, it's also that as marketers, we're always looking for opportunities to say something, right?
Mm,
So we're trying to infuse ourselves into the cultural conversation on social media. If something happens, um, if we can, a lot of times we want to try to connect our brand to that, or have something pithy to say about it. And I think that can pay off. We saw Oreo take advantage of the blackout during the
blackout.
Super Bowl a few years ago, and they got a lot of praise for that, at least within the marketing community. So that's great if you can do that, but I think you just have to be careful when your fingers on the trigger and you're trying to say something witty about every single thing that happens. You can
Right.
sometimes put your foot in your mouth.
Well, there's been, for first off, the Oreo thing is brilliant. What was their line? You could still dunk in the dark. I think that
Mhm.
was so
That was
amazing.
it. Yeah.
There's a lot of chatter within, at least that I'm hearing, that if, like, the internet is full of brands trying to be funny, and if every brand is trying to be funny, like, what's funny? Like,
Right.
it's one of those things. So like, it kind of like numbs the consumer to like, oh, another brand is trying to be off the wall funny, or another Liquid Death knockoff, or whatever it is.
Yeah. I don't know if you're on Threads yet, sort of the new Twitter, but the number of brands I've seen with this supposedly rogue brand manager running their Threads account saying, "Hey, help me get promoted by getting 100,000 likes on this post," or
Mm,
we're trying to. It's so overdone, and there's just so much copycat content out there, that yeah, I think in terms of trends, I mean, I hope that there's just a bit of a return to kind of uh, pragmatism and thoughtfulness, and brands trying to uh, just being a little less eager and anxious to jump on bandwagons,
yeah.
and copy whatever. We talk about differentiation all the time, and um, there's getting eyeballs on your brand, which is obviously really important, and then there's you know trying to make sure that you are saying something consistent and to some degree, if not unique, at least sort of on brand, right? Something that works for you and makes sense for you and what your brand is, what your business model is, as opposed to just trying to make sure that you're part of the conversation at all costs.
When you're working with the brands that you're working with, obviously differentiation and distinctiveness, are two things that come to mind. Like, what are some ways that you're trying? What are some ways that you are enabling brands to really be different? Like,
Yeah, I mean, it all starts with research, right? Everything we do should start with some kind of research. And I hope that word isn't too scary to too many marketers. It doesn't have to mean a huge survey and conjoint analysis. It can literally mean
Don't need
desktop.
to engage with Ipsos.
Yeah, you don't necessarily need to. Nothing against Ipsos.
No, no,
Um,
no.
no, you can get online and just look at how competitors are talking about themselves. You can have conversations
Or
with your
social
clients and
listening.
yeah, with a handful of their customers. I mean, it depends on the industry, it depends on the brand, but get a sense of what other people are saying. And there's you kind of just alluded to it. There's this debate in our world about distinctiveness versus differentiation, and are they are they different things first of
Yeah.
all, and if so, is one more important than the other? I don't. We don't have to get into that, but I mean, it can just be as superficial as, like I said, not saying the same things everyone else is saying, or having a different brand personality, trying to speak in a different tone, something that's relevant to your customers, something that feels like it fits with your brand, but that doesn't just sound like everybody else out there. I mean, speaking of, I don't even mean superficial in a negative way, but it can be just your color palette. It can be, taking a different tack in terms of distribution channels for the campaigns you're running, and trying to be in places that your competitors aren't.
Yeah.
Um, speaking to if we're going to throw jargon around, category entry points, right? So,
Mhm.
uh, is your brand the one? Is your to cite a real example, is your cookie the one that people are supposed to have after dinner with their cup of decaf, right? Is that something you can kind of position around, and a space that just isn't owned by anybody else, that doesn't really have to do with kind of the traditional brand components that we think of logo and tagline and voice and color palette and even sort of positioning and strategy. It's just another way of thinking about a way to stand out, by being different, or by being in a place that nobody else is.
As Marty Newmeyer says right there,
Zag.
Zag, right? If everyone's
Yeah.
zigging, how do you? I mean, if you're ever going to throw jargon around, Rob, this is the time to throw jargon around.
All
We're
right. All
fucking
right.
zagging, we're zigging, we're differentiation, category entry points. But
I
that's
told I told Marty he's got the only book I know of with like all of the advice is in the three-letter title of the book, right? Like, and
right,
I mean, you should still read the book, but like,
right.
basically that's it. Is just zag, and yeah, it's great. It's the shortest piece of useful brand advice I've ever read.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely brilliant. Though he eloquently makes something that's so complex extremely simple, which
Yep,
is in one case
the talent.
frustrating because I didn't think about it. Like, well,
Yeah.
sure, it's right there, but brilliant stuff. So talk to me about ad budgets next year, right? With the year coming up and with inventory, whether that's digital or linear, seemingly getting swallowed up by the Democrats and the Republicans, right? And whatnot. Like you mentioned showing up in unexpected ways. Might that be the advice that you give brands who might be worried that they don't have enough money to compete?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I As a brand consultant, I don't get directly involved in how advertising budget is used all that often. I do think that look, we always have to try to strike this balance between the short-term gains of performance marketing, or that sort of bottom of funnel stuff, and the longer-term brand building. So maybe to put it really simply. Um, it may just be about rethinking that balance in a year where
Mm,
uh, all the channels are flooded and saturated with election related ads or whatever else. It could be time to dial up the long term brand building,
yeah.
because you're just
Mm,
not able to cut through the chatter in terms of getting a click directly to your site from the ad. Maybe it's time to build the brand, and just kind of, I would never say make it all or none, but maybe that's a reason to consider turning that dial a little bit more towards your long, and when you're thinking of the long and the short of it, maybe it's the long
yeah.
investment.
I had a conversation with a good colleague of mine, Tim, who might be on here. Shout out to Tim. He runs a community group called Entrepowerment. Uh, a lot of chatter him and I are having about community being kind of like this, the thing that every brand needs to strive for. Like community is the new marketing, community is the new branding. And I think that's what you're alluding to, right? The long game is building that community, building that avid user base, and you've done a phenomenal job with how brands are built, and you've built a community around it. What's your take on community building for brands moving into next year?
I think it's right for some brands and maybe not as much for others.
Mm,
Similar to purpose, I think
mm.
you don't necessarily expect to have a community around uh, the staples that you're selling on Amazon. Um, but if it's something where people really connect with the brand, or there's an opportunity to have people connect with the brand in a deeper, more emotional way, um, then yeah, I think community is kind of uh, a holy grail in terms of getting that sort of echo chamber where your customers are pretty much advertising your
Yeah.
brand to other customers, right? I'm still amazed. I mean, still amazed that people will pay for a sweatshirt that says Gap. Really big on it. I always look at that and think. I mean, not that I haven't done it, but I just think like, wow, you're paying to market that brand for them for them.
I got called
So
out. I got
yeah,
called out over Thanksgiving, Rob, because I was up in Massachusetts with my wife's family, and I like LL Bean, right? I have an LL Bean hat right here. I got a jacket. So I walked into dinner with cousins. I was wearing my quintessential dad sweatshirt, which is a Snoopy LL Bean collaboration. Snoopy's reading a map, and my wife's cousin's husband, this guy John, who him and I are super friendly. I walked in, he goes, "Did you forget all your clothes and have to go shopping today at the LL Bean factory or whatever?" And I was like, "Touche, my friends, touche." But I get a lot of questions from brands, and it's like, you know, for an expert, right? It could be a stupid question, but I think for the novices out there, it's not. But like, how do you said like, oh, community is great for brands that want to connect deeper, but how do you connect deeper? How do brands connect deeper to their audience?
I think again, it's you have. I do believe as a brand strategist, we're sort of trained or indoctrinated in these ideas like purpose or cause or making that deeper emotional connection. And I do think every brand uh, has an opportunity to explore this possibility of creating a deeper emotional connection. I think as I get older, I get a little more pragmatic and realistic about it's just not right for some product
Mhm.
categories. And we've seen brands try to stretch it a little too far. I'm sure you heard um, the Unilever activist
Mhm.
investor who said the purpose of Hellman's mayonnaise is sandwiches, right? It's not something deeper than that. It's making sandwiches taste better. And
Right.
that resonates with me. I see both sides of the conversation there. I think it's great for brands to try to stand for something deeper if they can. The way to do it is, God, I hate to sound like a broken record, but research again, right? So
Yeah.
if you really understand your customers, who's buying your products, who's buying your brand, um, who's out there that might be interested in what your brand is selling, and if you can get a sense of what they care about, whether and how that connects back to your brand, if you can credibly position yourselves uh, around that idea. And do it in an authentic and consistent way, right? So again, it's Patagonia. It's not um, BP who's saying that they're all about the environment while
Right.
they're still pumping oil out of the ground. It's got to be true. It's got to be. It's got to cut deeper than an ad or a logo, and it's got to hold true over time. But if it's something that you're willing to commit to um, as an organization, then I think it's there for a lot of brands
Yeah.
to be able to do that.
I really appreciate your take on how it's not right for everyone, right? And not again, you use staples, right? If you're selling a bullshit item like that, like you're not building
I
a
just
community
yeah,
around
I just looked on my desk and it was the first thing I saw.
rapadora, as you say in Spanish. I just try to. I like your take, right? Sometimes I think us branding folks can sometimes be on our high holy horse and think that purpose solves everything, and perhaps that's a bullshit statement from yesteryear, and we need to be more realistic. One of the questions that we just got on YouTube is, do you think that there are what are the big challenges brands are going to face next year?
I mean, I think year to year, the challenges probably don't change that much, right? So it's probably going to be the same challenges we're facing now.
Yeah.
How do you cut through in a crowded market? There are some obvious trends that are out there that we need to be aware of. So things like AI. Um, I think with these things like AI that get so much buzz, both inside and outside the marketing world, we as marketers have kind of a dual responsibility. I do think we have to have our finger on the pulse, right? You talked about Thanksgiving, same for the holidays, whatever you're celebrating, but if you're together with family later this month, like, we're the people that should be able to talk about ChatGPT, right? To
Right.
grandma, or like, we should, just as much as a technologist, or a journalist who their job is to be on top of this stuff. I think as marketers, we have a responsibility to kind of know what's going on in the world. Like, we're supposed to know culture so that we can figure out how to connect with that, and technology in case it has an impact on how branding is done. But I also think marketers have a bad habit of getting so wrapped up in some of these trends that we kind of drop everything and forget all the fundamentals. And AI is one of those where there's too much talk right now about how everything is changing and our jobs are fundamentally going to be different. Look, it's a big deal. There's no question that AI, the potential of quantum computing, what's happened with DTC over the past 10 years, all of these things are having an impact, but none of them are enough at this point to say, let's throw out everything we've known about marketing for the
And in
past
our
50,
laurels,
100 years.
right?
Yes, exactly. So I think, but I guess, yeah, to answer the question, I think we will continue to face challenges around how to make use of AI, how to balance the long and the short of it that I mentioned earlier, how to spend in a way that builds your brand over the long term, but also takes advantage of short term opportunities. I do think purpose, to drop a name. I've been reading a lot of Mark Ritson, and I took Mark Ritson's mini MBA earlier this year. I'm going to take the other one in 2024. I'm excited about that.
So you're bullish on it, like you like the program
on the mini MBA. Yes, yeah, I do. We could have a long conversation about the kind of pros and cons of it, but I think it's expensive, so it's an investment. But if you have the money and are interested in getting some of that fundamental training, I think it's great. And he's also just wildly entertaining, which you can get for free by just reading his stuff. I think the reason I was bringing him up is he has a really, I think, good instinct to talk about this balance. So back to differentiation and distinctiveness, he says it's both, right? It's this sort of dualism. Long and the short of it, it's both. You got to do both. DTC or traditional marketing, it's both. DTC it's not a business model. It's a distribution channel, and every brand should be paying attention to it. And so I think being able to strike those balances in 2024, staying nimble in what's going to be another crazy year, I'm sure, is probably what we all need to be doing.
Staying nimble. This is why, like, recently I've been, every brand needs guidelines, but I think even more so, like, there's like an operating system, and like brands need that operating system because we have to be nimble, we have to be fluid. And so, like, I feel like there's always this tension of we need to define the brand and be rigid, have rigor, but at the same time we need to be fluid to changing economic, societal, cultural, changing consumers. What's your advice to brands that are just like, what the fuck do I do? Which one is it? Where do I go?
I'm going to channel Ritson again and say it's both. But I think, look, so I think like flexibility comes from strength. Even if you think like that, that makes sense in the context of athletics, right? But it works with branding as well. You need to have a solid foundation so that you can intelligently and rapidly react to things in a way that makes sense for you.
That's
If you
brilliant.
really understand what your brand is all about, then you can pull off the Oreo stunt during the Super Bowl without doing something that just makes everyone think like that's not what that brand is all about, and it completely flies in the face of what they stand for. You have to have that kind of foundation, and that can be created through these traditional things like a brand book or brand guidelines. These things that we've been doing for decades. I do think that there are a lot of branding people like me that have been doing this for a while that probably still are a little too rigid, a little too overly invested in getting the words exactly right around the positioning statement and getting that into a guidelines document that's going to be disseminated to all 100,000 employees and everyone's going to have it memorized. That may be a little old school. There are probably newer, more agile ways of thinking about this where you're still getting that foundation, getting a general understanding of what the brand stands for, trying to imbue that into the whole organization, but not thinking that's going to be it for the next 20 years, right? These days, I think brands need to be able to adapt a little more rapidly than that. And so there's a shift happening, but it's something that we can be a little conservative about and not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Do not throw the baby out of the bathwater might be how we end this one, Rob. I think to
good advice
point,
for parenting too.
Right. I'll remember that one as next time I give my son a bath. I think like the big thing here, right? Like shiny, bright new objects are gonna come and hit us daily, weekly, monthly. And I think that we need to, I think the best brands are the ones that can recognize that, hey, this is a shiny, bright new object. And perhaps it's right, perhaps it's not, but let's make sure it's rooted in research. And something you said in the beginning that I just wanted to call back out is you mentioned threads. And I don't hear anyone talking about threads. And so
maybe just the people on threads are talking about threads. I don't know.
Right. So like, how about shiny, bright new object? But you're into threads? Have you abandoned X and now are only on threads?
Pretty much. I still have the accounts on X, formerly Twitter, but I have not been using it or checking it as much. I'd be lying if I said that wasn't entirely because of ideology and just all the political bullshit that's been going on and Musk being who he is. It's obnoxious, but honestly, partly I just felt like my feed on Twitter turned entirely into like a self-reflection of people just talking about Elon Musk and talking about Twitter. And I was like, that's not why I'm here. I'm here to get the news. I'm here to, learn from other branding people. And that started to get sort of buried. And I know a lot of people have kind of gone to LinkedIn. I don't love LinkedIn being like a Twitter feed
it's definitely changed.
And so Threads has been, I think, little by little, I'm seeing some of the people that I used to follow on Twitter kind of migrate over, and that's been nice. So I am, to use your word from earlier, I'm bullish on Threads right now, but it's definitely not what Twitter was. It's kind of it's a little quieter still. So I hope that changes.
Well, we need to wrap up for now, Rob. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I'm looking forward to having you back on the full podcast so we can talk about the new book that you have coming out with the great Alina Wheeler, and your naming book. But for those who are listening and watching, tell everyone how they can find you on the internet. Where do you live?
Thanks. The easiest thing to do is go to robmeyerson.com. You can see how my name is spelled right there. I'm on Instagram and Threads and LinkedIn. You can also check out heirloomagency.com and howbrandsarebuilt.com. Those are all linked from robmeyerson.com, but any of those places you'll be able to learn more and get in touch with me.
Awesome. And for more on the Talking with Branders podcast, go to brandersmagazine.com. And for more on me, go to stephenpicanza.com. And everyone, enjoy the weekend. Have some pizza, have some wine. We'll see ya.